Hello and welcome to My Favorite Games, a podcast for game designers to geek out about games they like to play. Today, I'm super excited to host John Carimando. John is an artist, graphic designer, and board game developer. Born and raised in Queens, New York, John has lived in Brooklyn for over a decade. He divides his time in Brooklyn between Kensington and Dumbo as an active member of the Gumbo Collective, where he serves on the board of directors. He's also the owner and game designer for Gamey. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Gelb, thank you for having me. This is wonderful.
So before we get to your background and the several games that you've already, that you've designed, the game that you've brought to the kind of figurative desert island today is a little game called Carcassonne. Tell me about it. What do you love about it?
It was Carcassonne leans into the way I see the world, kind of through an artistic lens, spatial like awareness of like how colors mix and how shapes connect to each other. I was also one of the first of these in the early aughts of like the first type of like modern indie board games. Like we're not talking about mass market stuff like Monopoly stuff, right? With that, Catan and Carcassonne were my like kind of two first games, but Carcassonne, I love it because I can read into the future of the board because of the way the stuff lays out. And I love the vanilla Carcassonne. When you throw the river, which I guess is it included now in the game? But I like the vanilla like Carcassonne, just the simple pieces that started it all. And whenever I start playing it, I always go for farmland because that's the biggest chunk of pattern that presents itself. And I like usually plan out two figures so that if somebody tries to horn in my territory, like I'm already set up to like overtake them, even if they connect. So like, and I can see the game go. And I haven't even memorized the tiles. I'm just intuitively like seeing how the board lays out. So that's like one of my, like favorite types of games to play.
So
And
briefly,
yeah,
can you just describe to us for anyone who hasn't played Carcassonne,
sure.
what is it that you do? What's the objective, and also what's the theme?
All right, yeah. It's such an old game. We were saying like that you assume that everybody's
Yeah.
played this already, but not everybody has. The players uncover tiles, like draw tiles, and place them adjacent to each other so that they're building a map. And when they are building that map, they have opportunities to place their little meeples. Did this meeple originated from this game or from because the term meeple is my people or something like that, right? So I wonder if it's from here. Um, but because in the instructions it says meeples, that's why I'm saying. The tiles are built up so that there's either grassland, road, or a piece of a city, or another structure like an abbey or something like that. Excuse me, a monastery. So when you place the tile down, you then have an opportunity to place one of your meeples on either a road, the farmland, or a piece of the city or another structure. And only one every time you put a new tile. And by doing that, you hold dominion over that part of the tile. And then you score points as you fulfill, like finish a city or finish a road or like connect a bunch of farmland. So like that planning, because it's in my head, it's visual planning. It's not necessarily like game planning. It's like, okay, how is this going to connect with the rest of the game in the future, and then present itself. And I also love how it looks at the end because it's almost infinitesimally random. Like it can, because the people playing have different ways of seeing the world around them, and then they represent that in the tiles. And it's a wonderful bloom effect of like how land is made, in our brain. So that's one of the reasons why I love it so much.
So would you say that it's the theme? I mean, we're in France. So you're in an old city.
You're building the region That's what it seems like. You're building the region. The cities are built
Sure.
as well into that kind. You're building out the landmass and then scoring points as you do so because it is a board game. Points is a part of it.
What do you love most? Is it the theme? Is it around this kind
Oh, I
of,
see.
you mentioned kind of, in the same realm of like settlers, of
Right.
a an area building type experience. Is
Yeah.
it in the mechanics? Like, is that what makes it special? Is it the way that they interact? Like, what's
Uh,
special? What's most
yeah.
special about it
Yeah.
for you?
Oh, I'm gonna like just say like kind of the way it combos together because
Yeah.
the theme is always important and I'm sure we're gonna talk about I want to talk about this in the later on, but like I design theme first, then with some mechanical idea, and then do mechanics. And the my colleagues that who are mostly like developers um, kind of do it the other way around because they don't have and it's maybe because they don't have the design background or whatever. So like we always like talk about what's better. But for me, the theme of it plus the way you're building the landmass, it just like comes together so nicely. Such a it's a beautiful game. And not to talk about like the art itself is wonderful. And just the way the art becomes a new piece of art every time really gets me. And the game happens to play well too. So like that's whenever I'm playing a game, this even RPGs and all that, like I don't want to play uh the use Dungeons and Dragons mechanics with science fiction. It just doesn't like in my brain it doesn't work because D&D you roll dice this way and we're playing fantasy game. So if I want to play science fiction, I play Shadowrun and I want to drop a whole bunch of I'm talking second edition, whole bunch of D6s and like start counting the successes, like that kind of that's how I want my games to happen. So with Carcassonne again, it being like one of the first originator indie, it kind of like puts it all together in such a wonderful way. And I guess that's why it has staying power for me.
So I guess going on then from that, like, has your experience playing Carcassonne impacted the way in which you think about designing games? You say that you kind of think about theme first, and then you look at mechanics. Has that inspired the way that you think about game design?
Sure. I think every game I play inspires my future game design, but I'm more inspired by classic arcade games for my game development than um, necessarily board games. And I'm also including tabletop RPGs because those are the tabletop RPGs, video games, and board games have been, I guess, most people's, but it's like a lot of what I did when I was younger, mostly video games and tabletop RPGs. Board games were more of the um, classic mass market stuff, which was like, oh, let's play this. All right, you know. I don't know how much like heat I'm going to get for this, but I absolutely hate Monopoly. So any game that's not Monopoly is like great. Power Grid does it better than Monopoly.
You're not alone, especially Power Grid. Let's then dig into how did you grew up. You were playing RPGs. You were playing arcade games. Not as many board games, but the board games were the more traditional, eminent games like the glorious Monopolies and such. But how did you go from a passionate gamer
Yeah,
into saying, you know what, I can start creating some of
right.
these myself, designing them?
Yeah. I guess even in my young life, I was making games because every time we play Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm sure this is the same for a lot of people, but also a lot of people use modules. Us as a group never use the modules. We would like use the game world and then just write our own story because that's just we were all a bunch of little artists and like wanted to do that kind of thing. So that just becomes the foundation for like when it's COVID and I'm let go from my job, just like a lot of people. I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like my wife like was just like, why don't you do something you want to do? Make games or something. So I'm like, oh my God, I never thought that had that possibility. Now I'm I'm first generation. It's this I come from like a very blue collar background. Um, so the thinking is very blue collar. So like how do I take my artistic life, because I was doing fine art early on and then commercial art. So it's like, how do I take that and take the foundational learning of like this kind of blue collar experience and build into it? And it's like working hard to make something beautiful that's part of this process. So like then I'm like, okay, making games, and how do I like approach making games? I've like have like a production background in apparel, so I know how to deal with factories. So all the games that I make, I've done all the art, I've done all the game design, I've done dealt with the factory, I've done all the writing. I can't copy edit, so I usually have someone copy edit for me. And like because it's like and similar to other people you've interviewed, they want to have full creative input in their game. Because when you have a publisher, they want to like get their little fingers and stuff, and it is part of the process because for a lot of people they don't have a design background, so the publisher fills that role for them, and that's so yeah. So for me, designing games is like an artistic experience, and having people play it and critique well is again part of the process. And we can go all over that, but like I started in COVID, and I'm like, I'm gonna make some games. At first, I wanted to design video games, so I'm like teaching myself JavaScript, and like using Phaser, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I want to like eventually develop onto like Windows. So I'm like, okay, what should I use? And a developer friend of mine's like, why don't you try Godot Game Engine, which is an open source game engine. So I'm like, okay, cool, I'll try that. So from August to August, one full year, I get myself a junk vertical slice, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't do this. This takes too long. I want to design a game, and I'm not leaning into my background. Like I make physical objects, so leaning into my physical object background, I can like turn stuff around quicker. Like the game development itself takes many months, but the art production for me is like 2 months, 3 months for me to like just really easily pull off kind of thing. And I kind of like have bad habits where I'm in the middle of it. And I know you like in our conversation you talked about before the where you were talking about like you're designing a game and you showed some pieces to me and stuff. And like I'm designing production ready art in the middle of my process because I know I just could do it. So I'm just like making this art, and it's part of it is fun for me to make the art. And then I trash all this what people would consider final art and like redraw everything for the next step. And it's just because I'm fortunate enough to have that background, right? So, like I try to like do as much as I can.
When you decided during the pandemic, you know what, I'm gonna hang up my JavaScript code for the time being and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and switch to something physical. Um, was there, what in that kind of mentality of like, you come from an art background,
Hmm.
you're designing it as well. It's quite rare for someone to find that process fun, plus all of the other crap that you have to do
Right, yeah, yeah.
when self-producing
Yeah.
games, in terms of interacting with family or with factories and all that kind of stuff. I get that, and maybe it was because you have your apparel background, but was always from the beginning, were you just assuming, I'm just going to do this myself, or was there a stage at which you're like, yeah, I can do this part, but I'm definitely looking for someone to come in and handle that like business side, or I like the business side, but I don't like the some other the marketing side, or something like that.
Right. So I was kind of hanging up the game code a little bit. And at that point, I was also I know in my intro you talked about Gumbo Collective. They're a collective of game developers, and I'm a part of that group. And I have many colleagues. We're all indies. We're all designing games. And there's another colleague that is also designing board games, George Lee. So we're the crazy uncles of that group, only because we're just designing board games. Otherwise, it's a nice Venn diagram because I'm gonna get we said the Venn diagram. Whether you're designing analog games or digital games, we are designing games and we can overlap on the game design and not have to worry about our industry nonsense. So we can like meet in the middle, and because they play board games and they play video games and I play board games and I play a lot of video games, so it's like this kind of love in the center. So when I'm developing the games and play testing, there's a wonderful community. I'm very fortunate to have this wonderful community that who know how to like approach game design, and that's who I do my foundational work with. And then I do people who like to play that don't have that kind of background for the later stages, which is like fine tuning. Are people in the meta world, like in the real world, enjoying themselves? Like, is there, and then I do another round of play testing. And again, I'm sure this is like a lot of developers are doing the same, like a play testing just the instructions, where I just hand them the book and be like, good luck and see what happens. And I write that stuff. So,
That's
yeah,
risky.
yeah, it's risky. It's like, it's
Stressful.
you're bearing your soul on the paper, and the merits of your ability on this writing. It's like a very like personal experience, and a lot of board game developers, in terms of writing and just being quiet, like have to go through it. So it's not only like a fun like game journey, design journey, but it's also a spiritual journey for a lot of people, because it's like, oh, this is it. This is, once I write this down on paper, it is final, you know. But I take a like I have stuff printed and it's in my game, but I also release patch notes online. So if video game developers can do it, so can I.
So
Yeah,
exactly. And what do you think about feedback? Like, obviously, I mean, you talked about that in terms of this is a
right.
part of the process and all this
Oh
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
feedback.
But you also like to have control over things. And
Yeah,
usually, at least when I talk to a lot of game designers, it's quite split in terms of some people love feedback and they get excited by it, and that like kind of drives them, and others really hate it.
yeah,
And
no, totally.
they're just not fans. What do you think about feedback? Like
Right,
how do you think that you take it?
right. So I've been in commercial design for a very, very long time. Just to, so
So
I've
it's just
had,
boom, boom.
oh yeah, it's a I'm going to give you some examples of bad stuff so that you get a sense of like what I've dealt with in this kind of. All right, so I've had at meetings with other people, the owner of the company literally ripped my work up because they were frustrated, whatever, and they ripped my and threw it in the trash like 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 it was a vaudeville cartoon, just this kind of
Rom-com movie, the start
yeah,
of a
right, it's
rom-com
like
film or something.
I've had like just like people call my artwork inappropriate things in a work setting. I'm like, how can you say this in this work setting with other people around us? So I've had like a lot of like bad critique. Now, for me, when I'm listening to critique, I'm seasoned in this way. So for when this is what I need for my critique, it's the critique and their suggestion on how to fix it. If there's no suggestion how to fix it, the critique means nothing. Oh, this isn't fun. That doesn't, it's not fun for you. That's the answer. But it's like, it's not fun, you can try this. That's when I pay attention to it. That's my criteria for myself. So if there's a constructive thing, and constructive criticism doesn't only come from the game designer, the person who's done this a long time. Many people who are focused on playing these games, I have a lot of friends, a lot of people I've met who play these games, really know their stuff. They've never designed a game, but they have that active worked knowledge that is very important. And if they can give a critique, I will at least, at the very least, with that suggestion how to fix it, pay attention to it later on. And then I take it or leave it, because it's like, does this work for my game or not? And that's it. I'm very, very open about like, thank you. I'll take it under advisement. That's the
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, because it's hard also at those different phases of your development, I imagine, because someone who, when you're talking to fellow game designers, then you could try this is almost natural, and that's probably one of the reasons why they wanted to make that comment, or whatever comment, in terms of, I feel like this might not be the most effective way, versus maybe at a later stage it's harder for some people who aren't used to playtesting necessarily, or to articulate that, like, oh, it's just not fun, or I can't get it. And so, like, it's a challenge because at all stages, at least I found, like, all stages people want to be helpful, but there's a degree to which they want to be helpful, so therefore they are going to pick it apart more than it kind of needs to be, but also on the other hand is that they want to be helpful, so they kind of try and suggest something that they may not really understand,
Right.
so
Yeah.
therefore, like, not necessarily come across as particularly relevant, or at least the bit of
Yeah.
feedback might be disorienting,
I
and
mean,
in
that's
other
on
words.
us through our
Exactly.
ability, like through our experience as game designers to disseminate, right? So it's like, okay, they said it. Does it mean anything? No. Okay, next, and that's okay. Like in the moment, you try to be nice, but
Totally. And I don't know how you just how you kind of discern this, but, like, I certainly get, like, when someone says, well, usually they don't say this isn't fun. They usually, like, will, it's pretty clear that they found it not fun, but
yeah,
they're they're wanting to be polite. And I know that they can't pinpoint why, but I still want to know if I can get, like, something out of them. Like,
right.
at what point do you think that this was, what did you think about this? What did you think about this movement? Because often, sometimes, like, actually, those are the most interesting for me, at least. I will have some people who are like, yeah, this is not fun. I felt like this was too simple, or this was too complex. And then they go into a suggestion, and then that's up to us to say, cool, yeah, that's valid, because you're the target customer here, versus, okay, you've disqualified yourself out of who it is that I'm actually going for, so I'm not super concerned with your critique with it, right? But yeah, it's a continual challenge. And then also, at what point do you get to the point where it's good enough? It's good enough to go, good enough to draw the line. And I love what you're saying in terms of, well, you can just publish patches, but
Oh yeah.
but but especially as somebody who is an artist and the game designer and, like, everything, how do you decide when a game is like, okay, we're good?
I'm gonna again lean back in my experience. Commercial art, and you'll have and a lot of game publishers and people who publish are dealing with illustrators and graphic designers and all that. And the skill that really means something is you can be a wonderful, incredible illustrator, but if you never hit a deadline, you're useless to people. That means that you're doing personal work, so take your time with that work and create beautiful things. But if you're doing it for somebody that needs a certain time, it has to be done. It has to look good to they feel is like the developer feels like is ready. So that's the hallmark of knowing when. And then from my experience is like, okay, this is time to stop. And I've done that for each of these games. I've had that moment where I'm like, you know what, done, because it's artistically it's solid. Gameplay, it's a full game experience. There's no need to add more stuff. That's what expansions are for. Oh, you know, and
Yeah.
then it's like it's ready to go. Again, I'm just taking to my own experience. It's like
Yeah.
I know because I just kind of feel it because I know it's like okay, everybody's playing the game finished. Everybody feels satisfied. Done. There's no need more to add because you can add forever, and then you can have. I again going back to the Catan thing and
Mhm.
even maybe even well, this story's about Catan. I don't know if it's urban legend or if it really happened, where the original Catan was all the expansions all together, and then the publisher was like, "This is too much. We got to strip this down." And then the Catan the vanilla Catan that
Base.
we know
Yeah.
and love, is the product of all that stripping away, and then all the expansions. So I take that to heart whenever I design a game. Is I design the base game knowing that there's going to be an expansion for this. I'm going to design for this. I'm going to add to this. I'm going to add to that. So that's kind of like makes it easier to say, you know what, we're done. Because all this extra cool stuff is now expansion. oh, this is an expansion pack. Oh, this is like an add-on. That's it makes it easy for people to find the end to their game development process and feel good about it because they know they can expand on it when it succeeds. I'm not even going to say if. All our games when they succeed. That's the mindset to have when we design stuff.
And when you design stuff, it sounds like there's a running kind of thread in terms of the way that you think about games and playing games, in that it is not necessarily it doesn't necessarily need to be as structured an experience as as others, I don't know, might think. Oftentimes, I mean, you've played
Hmm.
all sorts of different types of
Yeah,
games. Oftentimes you're like, is it an RPG? Is it a board game? And a lot of time people like want to pigeonhole. Is this an area control game? Is it a tile placement
right.
game?
Yeah.
And you said something really, really cool about it when we were talking about it
Yeah.
earlier, in terms of your approach to not only the design process, but in terms of playing games, and having that kind of experience, or choosing the way in which you're wanting to experience a specific game.
Right.
And I think you were talking about Catan.
Oh, right, right. Yes. Yeah, because of all the years of playing role-playing games, it kind of permeates my experience when playing games in terms of fun. So, and is it annoying? Is it funny? Depends on the crew you're with. But whenever I play Catan, I always pick red because I have to role play the game like a Russian farm collective. It is so perfect for that game. And like calling everybody comrade is so much fun to do. So you get to practice a little voice work too. Um, and that's how I approach like all the board games that I play. If there's a moment to do that, like I'm going to take it. There was a the new Dune game that's been out for a little bit, I think. Right? I would just in the middle of the game just like reference the not the new movie, the original movie, and just like Shai Halud, like I'll just like start chanting like in the middle of the game while people are going because just to keep the ambiance going. It is such a fun, and then if it works well, people can get out of their shell and do it too. It doesn't mean it doesn't straight, like person at a game cafe that's standing next to me that wants to play, you know, go ahead, break out, make the vroom vroom sounds of the car that you're moving around. It's awesome. Again, that's a part of the fun and a lot of the meta aspects of when you're playing games. When you have a good relationship, even if it's superficial with new people, if the relationship with the people are good, the game is going to be better because the gameplay, like the game experience, I'm not saying the game mechanics because the game mechanics are what they are, but like when people are playing a game and they're all friendly and they all like want to play, even if it's a little adversarial, that's okay because a lot of the games are. That's cool. That's what makes those things where it makes a oh I didn't have fun into it's pretty good. I'll take it. I'll take the it's pretty good.
I'll
That's
take it.
that
It's
one
pretty good.
step.
Yeah.
We're talking board games. It's that one increment. Now we have to get them incrementally to the green, we'll get them there. That's why my approach to like RPGs and like role playing and like making voices all in there, and it just kind of like lends itself really well.
So you're just speaking of inspiration and
Yeah.
theme and experience. A lot of your work is inspired by uh, the kind of classic arcade style
Right.
games,
Yeah.
and so like talk to me about why those games are so appealing when it comes to
Oh,
developing cool board game experiences.
I love arcade games. I've been playing them since I was like very young. My first arcade game was Crystal Castles. Now, people hearing this are like, "What game is that?" It's a very old game. It's an Atari game. You play a bear that has to run around isometric maps, like little stages, isometric stages, collecting gems on the floor while avoiding villains that are running around the map. And it's a trackball game, so you're spinning a ball. And I was so short that older kids had to hold me up, and they eventually got me a milk crate. This is one bodega where I used to live. Like we would go into, and like back then, like when I was young, arcades were like in bodegas. They were in like pizzerias. They were even in convenience stores. There was even a taxi, like a taxi service like office that had like four arcades in them, like two on one side, two on the other wall. Like they were everywhere. So you can walk in with a quarter and play a game and like enjoy your however well your however good you are at the game, 5 to 10 minutes, and then be on your way. So there are these arcade games from 1978 to 2000 are the periodic table of elements of game design and gameplay. Every game has a little thing to it. Now, some are better at it than others, but like every game has one little piece. And back then, everything was bite sized. Whatever we would consider like a mini game now is basically a full blown arcade game back then, right? Because of just technology and space issues and all that stuff. But like again, every periodic table of elements, there's something in everything. So all of my games so far have been inspired by arcade games. Each one so far, well, maybe for except for the tree trimming game, which is more of a family um, tree garland game that's just inspired by balancing the tree out.
Aside
Yeah,
from it's like a Christmas theme game.
it's a Christmas
Um,
theme game. Yeah,
yeah. Like aside from that, then
yeah.
talk to me about the other games that you've actually released.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
You have what Mean Robo,
right.
Ray Racers. Yeah. Talk to me
So
about
the
how you approach them.
sure the Mean Robo, I wanted robots beating each other up. And just to let's just explain
Yeah.
the game,
Why not?
right? So Mean Robo is a up 2 to 4 player game where you're have a stack of robot cards that are they're square cards, so they're 2 by 2, and you lay them on the table, and they each have aiming like arrows on them. So you're laying out your robots. Everybody does it in order, and they have to lay out the next robot adjacent from each other. So, and then you're turning them and aiming them at your opponents. Then once everybody places the robots, you'll have this nice, colorful table of robots facing each other, or facing off on each other. And then at the end, they start beating each other up. So then it becomes a scoring round. So then you pick your target, and if you have enough robots aiming at your opponent, because every opponent has different strengths, then they blow up, you score the card. And that's inspired by a couple of arcade games, Gauntlet and Berserk. Now, Gauntlet is, if you play Mean Robo, the game will, every round you're stacking more robots on the table. So it'll actually fill up any play space you have. So if you have a small play space, it'll fill up the table. If it's bigger, it'll try to reach the edges. And if you ever seen cell division simulations, the game does that too. Like it blooms. As you blow each other up, it makes gaps and makes islands, and then you can add robots to those islands, and it slowly like builds out. And then that is inspired, but the visual of it is inspired by Gauntlet because the villains in the game. Again, if you're not familiar with Gauntlet, the players play a wizard, a warrior, an elf, or a Valkyrie, and you're running around um, different maps with hordes of villains. Like the villains will stack up on each other, waiting to get you, and the way they stack up is similar to the way Mean Robo stacks up. So everybody's trying to get you, and they're like, "Well, patiently wait their turn to beat you up." And they'll slowly file into you. So that's it. And then Berserk is a game where the player blows up robots. So I'm inspired by those two things, and it's more about again the theme more than the mechanics, because the
Yeah.
mechanics were born out of um,
What you
like
need to do.
just
Yeah.
what I needed to do, and like I had this idea. I'm like, okay, these robots have to face off on each other. How am I doing that? Oh, I love arrows. I love placement games. I love games like Advance Wars and stuff like that, where it's like um, less Advance Wars really, and then more Shining Force, where like it's gridded, but there's no grid on the game. You're playing on a table, so the cards themselves create the grid. Since everything has to be adjacent, everything works out perfectly fine. So that's that inspiration from that. And then for Ray Racers, I'm inspired by Tron, the video game Tron, the light cycle part of it. And I know that You interviewed Sean Holt.
Sean.
Yeah, I think it was episode 18, and he talked about, oh, I wish there was like a Tron board game. Well, guess what, Sean? You should try Ray Racers.
Dreams have been answered. There we
The
go.
dreams have been answered. Yeah, the so for that again, inspired by the light cycle part of Tron, and not the necessarily the movie because the movie didn't really explain it too well, but the gameplay of that. Like Tron basically explains the movie so wonderfully. You're doing every cool thing in the movie except for getting zapped by the laser. That kind of thing. So the light cycle part, and for Ray Racers, okay, how do I create the video game experience? That tension is every player plays at the same time. So everybody draws three cards, and then everybody starts counting. Okay, one, two, three, drop. One, two, three, drop. So they're literally building their lines and trying to um, avoid each other and blow each other up. So if we're going to be like use the technical words, they're like it's area control and survival games. You know,
Hmm.
yeah,
So, and then your latest game that's coming out
right,
is Galaxy Fighters, which is
yeah,
similarly has a pretty classic sounding name. So,
right, yeah.
talk to me about Galaxy Fighters. What is it, and like who is it for?
Galaxy Fighters is a 2 to 4 player cooperative survival game where you're emulating like the classic shooter genre, video game genre, like Galaga, Galaxian, Ikaruga, Bullet Hell, like stuff like that, where the players are flying around their atmospheres. The board itself, it looks like a big cross. So the center is deep space, 25 spaces in the center. And then each side of that is the atmosphere for the planet, the defending Galaxy City, the districts of Galaxy City. So the players move their little ship tile around, they fire at aliens, and then at the end of the round, the aliens advance on them. So they spread out to their city and try to invade the city. So like you can get blown up, you can shoot stuff, you have power up moves where you can shoot lasers and spread beams and wide beams. So it has all of the hallmarks of the video game shooting genre in the game, and it still keeps the tension of the villain progression is happening every turn. So trying to like make that stuff happen was a big like play test chunk to like get that. Okay, are you feeling enough pressure? Because it's all feelings. There's no the math to it is like very arbitrary.
So it's like you were describing it before, like panic levels,
Oh
and
yeah,
you seeing those is almost like a mechanic indicator as well.
yeah.
Yeah,
Because at first it seems like, oh, we can handle this,
yeah,
and then they just pile up because the tiles stack on themselves, so the villains
yeah.
stack.
I've seen some.
And
Yeah.
then yeah, so then when it's any villain that's facing you on your turn will move towards you on your turn. And if there's a large stack of villains, they do a thing called frenzy where they just start spreading out in all the directions that they're logically facing. So that can surprise other players too. So there's a little bit of that kind of tension happening. If everybody feels like panicked or even a low grade panic, it's succeeding. Yeah,
I
that's
I
my
I
that was
do
my
love
takeaway.
I do love how a lot of times as like designers you are looking for frustration points or panic points or all this kind of stuff, and but it's just about measuring it. It's like, oh, are you frustrated? Good, but are
Yeah,
you this kind of frustrated? Or are you that kind of
right.
frustrated?
Yeah,
um,
it was very tough to like gauge that, and because everybody is so different, it's like I played that like playtest that a lot, and just to see just how people felt, you know.
so with your other games, you've self-published, and they're out there. They're available to buy. But with Galaxy Fighters, you're going on Kickstarter. You're planning to go on
Right.
Kickstarter early 2025.
Hmm.
Um, talk to me about that, like from a business perspective. Like
Yeah.
why? First off, why did you when you started? Had you thought about Kickstarter when you were making some of the other games? And then why go to Kickstarter for Galaxy Fighters now?
Sure, yeah. Uh, it's more expensive to produce. Well,
Okay.
to use the baseline of it. Right? The other games, I was fortunate. I had some good clients, um, and I saved a lot of money, and I was able to self-publish Mean Robo and Ray Racers, because ultimately they're card games, even with the board. So they were more affordable to make. It was still a big chunk of money, but well, it was possible. And like in my research, um, creating the company and like board games and everything, I was watching a video. I forgot the designer's name, but was well known. And he had this tree of who makes money. And sadly, the the person creating this wonderful thing you're playing gets woefully little money. And it's that is the we can say that about indie game development in general, whether we're going analog or digital. It's absolute travesty. And I thought to myself, okay, I have the requisite skills to make physical objects. So I'm like, let me go to that next part of his money tree and go to the publisher,
Who
which
makes?
still is on the bottom part of this whole apparatus. But it's like, okay, make a little bit more. So that's why I decided to go that way. When I was like supporting Kickstarters back when it was more creatives, or at least that part of Kickstarter, creatives wanting to make something and needed money to make it. So I would donate, essentially donate money to people to make their thing happen, whether I was going to get anything or not. Like I didn't really I couldn't offer a lot, but it was enough that it means something to people. And that's great. So just that's how I started the Kickstarter idea. Now it's kind of more of a in a early retail space now, particularly for board games. Um, and I think it's a shame because now small people can't small, but like smaller scope games or projects can't really be made because there's a lot of triple I independent publishers that are like glomming the space. So it makes it harder for everybody. So now it ends up being just a marketing platform because you're already setting up your marketing plans months in advance before the Kickstarter even hits. At least that's my understanding. And that's what I'm kind of doing. And I'm sure everybody's doing that. And whether it's a secret or a poorly kept quiet secret, that's the reality of it is you have to do copious amounts of marketing, spend a lot of money doing so just to get people on your Kickstarter. And even on the Kickstarter, it's not successful if it doesn't hit on the first day. It's absolute madness. Even if it succeeds in hitting days later, it's not considered a success. It's kind of disheartening for people to even attempt it. So I'm trying this out. I'm using a service to help with the marketing. I'm sure um, you've heard of Launchboom and other developers have said, have used that too. And they're helping with the marketing guidance. But you still have to do all the legwork of creating the art, doing photography. I'm very lucky. My games are simple enough that I recreate all my games in 3D so that I make my marketing assets from renders and they look real enough for everybody. So that's awesome. But even having to do like, oh, we have to do photography for the game, and it has to be a photo on a table that looks thematically proper, and then we have to have like little scenery bits behind the packaging so that people feel that, oh, this is its normal dwelling. When I see it in the wild, it's going to be on a table with all these posies. Like this kind of like um, design and basically like it's this artifice that goes on top of everything else. You're designing this game and then you have to like recreate this experience for people so that they can put their money down. And it's tough. It's tough for indies trying to like break in. So it ends up being becoming this marketing thing. So the reason why I'm doing it is one, Galaxy Fighters. I'm now introducing plastic pieces, so that ups the price. It's a little bit larger of a game, both uh, like measurement wise and scale. So it's like, okay, I'm going to need people to like kickstart some money to make this thing happen. Otherwise I'd be saving for many, many years for this to get pulled off. And I think it does have a space in people's heart for this type of game. Um, is it a unique game? There's so many games out there with wonderful ideas and themes that I hope that it can stand out. And I think its DNA coming from arcade games may differentiate it, I think. So I hope for that kind of differentiation where people that are playing it will see that in the game and then feel the same feeling, the nostalgic feelings they had, because people love nostalgia, right? So the nostalgic feelings they had from their youth, from like um, the games that they play now, video games they play now, they see that in this game and like really get attracted to it. So that's one of the reasons for the Kickstarter money and the marketing aspects of it.
Do you think that if it's successful, if you're happy with the outcome, do you think that you would go back and just and think of Kickstarter as, as you say, as this kind of marketing process that, whether it's a necessary evil or not, something that you then have to do for every single game? Or is this like a specific decision that you've made because it's a specifically more complex game? It's going to require a little bit more upfront. But then you might choose not to, for example, do a Kickstarter if your next game is a little bit simpler.
Right. Yeah, that's the game simplicity. We're not talking about, I know you're saying simpler. Simpler like
Materials,
production wise,
materials. I mean,
material wise.
yeah,
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 absolutely.
production
Yeah.
wise, yeah,
The production wise, if it's simpler, I'm not going to do a Kickstarter because you're
right,
riding the popularity of the previous Kickstarter. It's like, what are you doing now? I know is a very much a thing that's in people's heads. But like, you ride that wave a little bit,
yeah.
hopefully that I did woefully little marketing for my previous two games, which I hope to remedy now that if this, when the Kickstarter hits, there'll be some money there to like showcase all the games in marketing, and then I can do that going forward, like pick the game to be the Kickstarter, and then do other games that are not.
So how have you approached the marketing up until this point for your other games? You produced multiple games. Is it mostly online sales? Have you I know you didn't want to go to different publishers. Have you worked with different have you pitched to distributors? Do you mostly sell just e-commerce? Do you directly engage with retailers? Like what's been your kind of strategy up until this point?
Right. I have a distributor,
You
Indie
do.
Pro,
Okay.
a wonderful independent supporting distributor on the West Coast, and they helped me out when Fun Again closed their doors
Mhm.
because the for me the confluence events were a little tragic in that I was making I've produced my games and I was producing the third one. So I've sent my first two to Fun Again, and my third one was coming from the factory on the truck to Fun Again. And I had to, within 2 weeks, find another distributor. And those other indie distributors, the consolidators that a lot of people would talk about, would not even look at me. So I had to, like, I was running around looking. And Indie Pro is um, newer to the game, hungry, and they took a lot of people from Fun Again and helped a lot of people out. So it was very cool. Much thanks to Will Carson for that. He helped pull us out. Yeah.
Working with a distributor, I guess most people probably listening, I mean, maybe have done some research about this or already understand how that works. But you have your designer, your publisher, your potentially like you have consolidators in the middle
Right, yeah,
here. Then you have a distributor. Then you have retailers.
right.
Sometimes you can go straight to retailers, but pitching into a publish. What are the benefits of working with a distributor versus, let's say, doing your own distribution? Just to kind of like brief people up.
Oh yeah, they'll hold your stuff. Like storing your stuff, mostly again, depending on where you get your games made, there's MOQs, minimum quantities that you have to build. So I live in an apartment setting. There's no way they're going to be able to hold 3,000, 4,500, 4,500 boxes. There's no way I'm going to hold that. So that's what the wonderful thing about distribution is. They're both storage and will mail stuff out when stuff gets sold. So Indie Pro fulfills that. And on top of it, will will drive around his region of the United States and go into stores and pitch games that he feels are good. So I was fortunate enough that he pitched me Robo on the West Coast and stuff like that. So I even walked to mom and pops in Brooklyn. I'll just walk into a store. Here's a sample. I try to do a soft sell, like here's a sample. Here's some marketing materials. If you feel like this is the right thing for your store, I've gotten a few sales that way. A lot of people are risk averse, I guess now, and they're not willing to support somebody independent when they're like I don't know this distributor. That was one person was like, I don't know this distributor. I'm like, yes, I'm an indie developer, and this distributor supports independent developers. So you may not know them in the wild scope of like buying all the candy lands and that kind of mass marketing. So it's hard to like get past that, but I just keep doing it. So like every few months I come in with another game and be like, here's my other game, here's some marketing, and like hope, and I get a few sales. Fortunately not enough. So that's why we everybody leans on Kickstarter, everybody leans on social, like internet social marketing, because that's where people are always looking at their phones, unfortunately. Hopefully we can, as analog game developers, get the person to put their phone down so they can play a game together and then pick it back up when it's done.
Mm,
But and look at our marketing. But the
interesting.
that yeah, right. So that's the biggest part, because if the Kickstarter hits and it does well, people are like, oh, this is a winner. I want to back a winner. It's all of this
Hype.
social,
Yeah.
yeah, the hype, all this social like engineering things happen to it, and it's it's just a lot of work.
Doing a little bit of snooping on your Kickstarter page, I have noticed that Galaxy Fighters isn't actually your first Kickstarter, or at least there's something else on there, Warrior Princess, from a little while ago. Tell me a bit about that, because that doesn't seem very action arcade game styled.
Yeah, this was 2015, but a long time ago now. The D&D 5 was coming out, just came out. So I thought, oh, let me make something for D&D Game World for D&D 5. And I was part of a um, like a message board group back when that was like big stuff, called Nerd NYC, and we would run small conventions in New York. And I ran a what if Disney princesses were like in the D&D world kind of thing. So I ran that adventure. And people really liked it. So I thought to myself, let me take that idea, strip away the Disney part because they're very litigious, and make characters based off their root, uh, the root fairy tales, and add classes to them. So basically, there's like the warrior princesses, you know, Cinderella, Briar Rose. Notice I'm not using Aurora, so I'm using their their classic names: Briar Rose, Belle, Wa Mulan. Those characters, and taking them from their stories and subverting the story so that they're not passive in the story. And I designed the D&D world so that it's a deck of 100 tarot-sized cards. So everything was full color. This was back when I was like, oh, Kickstarter will like people on Kickstarter will support this because this was a long time ago and it's less the marketing giant that it is now. So I was like, okay, I'm asking for this money to like make this a small run. It was a very small run, and it was a 100 card deck, and I got a lot of good response from it because people love the just being able to disseminate the information on cards and stick it in their books to like push. And it was full color, and I had friends help me write it and paint it. Like it's all illustrated and everything and written out. I wish it was better copy edited. There's a lot of errors and a lot of SRD issues, but again, it was just coming out. D&D 5 just came out, so it was a little bit of the Wild West in terms of what you can write and what you can't write because they didn't finalize it. But I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love role playing games in general. I wanted to make something for that, and that was the
Nice.
that one attempt kind of thing. So there's some
And
decks floating
successful.
around. So yeah, yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yes, it succeeded. It was small scope. People loved it. I was able to get everything. The trick, and I'm sure like a lot of other developers, it's like the game was already in the factory when I did the Kickstarter. So a lot of people would be emailing me, "Oh, I don't know if you'll be able to get this off by Christmas," because I delivered it right before Christmas. I did it because and I didn't want to like open the curtain. I'd be like, "Don't worry, everything's taken care of. You'll be able to land it," kind of thing. Everything was already being made by the time the Kickstarter happened, so it worked out. It was really great. Got a lot of great feedback. Did a couple of conventions with it, and I might bring that back and make a board game out of it in some fashion. The but like right now, since I made the game, I want to have more. Because it was me and an illustrator friend and a writer. Like I want to have more women designing for the game.
In the
So going
process.
into that, right, it leans into that. So going into the game, this one would be like strictly that. I will probably be more hands off, other than being the creator of it for the board game. So
Interesting.
that's kind of pushing
Moving into the publisher,
right,
developer type role,
right.
and yeah, yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
Cool,
I mean it's
awesome.
yeah, that's the genesis of that. Yeah,
You're about to come out with
yeah,
Galaxy Fighters.
right.
Um, are you working on other games? Anything that you're able to share?
Oh yeah, yeah. I have again. I know a lot of. I always like to refer to other people that I've heard on your podcast. They talk about they have huge spreadsheets. There's a lot of games. Like I think if you're doing this and you don't have that spreadsheet, you're not doing it well enough. Like you should have a lot of ideas. So the next game I'm kind of working on is tentatively titled, though I like to make the titles pretty solid in my head. A plus number one American football game.
Great.
Yeah. So I'm trying. So right now I'm of two minds of it. I have the way the game is laid out and how I want to approach the gameplay, but I'm trying to. I ask different people, like people who are really into sports, people who are not into sports, and I'm like, should I learn football while I'm designing this game, or should I not bother? And whatever I know from Joe Montana's Sports Talk Football from the Genesis be enough for me to create this game with. So that's right now I'm debating, like, do I like learn American football, the nuance of it, like try to like get into the brain of the game so that when I recreate it, it feels like honest? Or should I be like, this is what I think football is? But I kind of, right now, I'm kind of leaning towards trying to learn a little bit because I want that kind of experience. When you're playing this game, you should be like, oh, wow, this feels like football, you know? So right now, it's a two-player game. Each player there's basically a line of scrimmage, basically a football field in between the two players with a toy football in the center. And then you're playing cards in front of you that um, accrue like offensive and defensive points. And whoever has the most in the threshold scores that many yardage. It's still very rough. But then you move the
Cool.
football back and forth. And if you score it, you score it. But I think the one mechanic that, at least in the United States, because American football is mostly a United States construct, the idea is even when I was younger, we all did this. You ever fold a piece of paper into a triangle
Yep.
and then you
Yep.
flick it in between the goalposts? I mean, that's in rugby too, somewhat. That's part of the game. So when you want to kick a field goal, you would, wherever your football landed on the line of scrimmage, you'd stick your paper there and you try to kick it in between the person's hands. And when people heard that, they're like, "I love it," and I'm like, "Okay, maybe I have something." Right? Just from that
Build,
interaction, maybe I have something to work on. You know, like that.
building a game around flick football.
Right, building a game around football. I've
Nice.
seen other football like board games doing a little bit. It's stats based. There's a lot of numbers, and okay, if people are willing to play a game where they're like, oh, this is my average run percentage, and like this is my tackle like rate, like whatever those numbers, I'm making stuff up now. But like people can count up to maybe 2 digits and be okay with it. So I think I have some space to work with.
John, thank you so much for taking some time to share your experience and to geek out a little bit about Carcassonne with me today. If anyone out there would like to find out more about Gamey and Galaxy Fighters, you can find out more information about Gamey's games like Mean Robo, Ray Racers, and the Tree Trimming game on Instagram with the username Gamey at Gamey Together, on Facebook at Together Gamey, and www.gamey.fun. You can find out information about Galaxy Fighters that is coming soon to Kickstarter by going to galaxyfighters.gamey.fun. And you can also get access to all the various links right below in the description. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me, Gelb. This is wonderful.